folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. This is episode 102. 102, past the 100 mark. I didn't mention it on my last episode, folks, that was recorded immediately following Chicago, but I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Yasmin Evan from Material and Relay FM. This week, I've got another pretty much tech-centric show to talk about, although I would make an argument that its ramifications are much wider and broader, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But you guys have heard me talk a lot about Chicago podcast movement. I'm sorry, you're going to keep hearing about it. One of the things that happened there was I met a lot of awesome people, had a lot of cool conversations, and my hope was to be able to bring some of those people to a regular conversation interview here on the Podcast Digest, and this will be the first time we're making good on that hope. So I am welcoming now to the Podcast Digest, host and producer of Codebreaker from Marketplace and APM, host Ben Brock Johnson, and producer Clare Toeniskoetter. Ben and Clare, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thank you very much for having us. I'm excited to digest with you.
Great to be here.
It sounds like podcast eating, right?
Yeah.
That's what it...
Yeah.
That could be a spin-off show. I might have to look into that. Well, folks, it's great to have you guys here. Ben, I met you in Chicago for the first time. Actually attended your PMX talk, I believe. Yes?
Yeah, I think you did. Did you?
Yeah, well, I was momentarily hesitating because I was like, was it a session or a talk? I believe it was the part of the PMX on a Wednesday, yes?
Yep. It was PMX. It was very TED-ish. Well, I don't know how TED Talk-ish it was, but I think that was the idea, right? And
yes.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. And then I also ran into you, of course, on Thursday night at 8 p.m.'s little Mixer social deal, which was also a lot of fun. And it was great to meet you. And you actually told me about Codebreaker, which I had heard of but had not yet listened to. I'm an honest person and want to admit that, but have since done so and loved it, which I'm happy to have you both here to talk about. But before we jump into Codebreaker, we're going to talk all about that. But before we do that, what I like to do and kind of start out these conversations is get folks to know a little bit about both of you and sort of your work pre-Codebreaker, maybe your life Codebreaker, sort of like how did you guys end up in podcasting, maybe with APM or Marketplace in general. So let's go ladies first. Producer of Codebreaker, Clare, sort of give us a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, so I came on to Marketplace to actually start with Codebreaker. So I had no Marketplace background before that, as Ben will tell you that he does. But I had been in New York only for a couple years, moved to New York to actually do an internship at Radiolab, and then was freelancing, working for different programs, and then Marketplace came up with this, and I started as a contractor here making Codebreaker, and it's since turned into a long-term thing, and yeah, that's my story.
So, Clare, was radio audio production kind of a goal of yours through school growing up? Is this what you kind of always wanted to do, or did you sort of fall into it?
No, not at all. I fell into it. I grew up in Michigan, and I did a college radio program that was a music program just for fun, and that's when I fell in love with radio and did an internship out in Michigan for Michigan Radio, and eventually moved out to New York and decided to try to make radio a full-time thing rather than just a passion project on the side. All
right, Ben, what's your story?
I'm just riding the coattails of Clare to success and fame, mostly. I was, I came to New York about 10 years ago. I was a print journalist for a long time. I was a music reporter. I became a cops reporter, city desk editor for some local newspapers, then got an internship at WMIC, our venerable New York public radio station here, worked on a show called The Takeaway, and then went to work for Slate for a little while and helped them produce daily news videos. And then one of my former colleagues at WMIC who had moved on to Marketplace and for some reason didn't hate me, recruited me to Marketplace to work on the daily show that I now host. I started out actually producing that show. It's called Marketplace Tech for one David Brancaccio, who's a well-known name in the public radio world. And then I started hosting that show and really just wanted to get the company into podcasting. And the company had, podcast versions of its radio shows, but not a lot of podcast first shows. And so I wanted to sort of nudge the company further into that. So started piloting a show, and then luckily had Claire walk through our door, and we got started on it.
Yeah, my first meeting with Ben was, this is going to be a ton of work. It's going to be really difficult.
Is that what it was?
We need someone. Well, after I had my interview, we went and got beer a couple days before I started, and it was like, this is going to be a ton of work, but it's going to be great. And
really set it up well.
Like, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's amazing to realize that like podcasts are, they're hard work for anyone who makes them, as you know, Dan, right? But that is actually unfortunately also true even at a company that is ostensibly making radio and podcasts. It's always hard work.
I will tell you what, I've had a new realization, not from my own work, but from talking to all the guests that I've had. But I'm also starting to help out with another show, and that's about all I can say right now. But taking a little more active role in, it's a lot more work than this show. This show, I get to sit and talk to awesome people like the two of you, and then pretty much do mild editing, poop it out to the world, and everybody says, that was awesome. So,
awesome poop.
Exactly. Do me a favor here, Ben, if you would. Take just a minute, because I want to kind of get this straight, maybe even in my own mind, because I'm not 100% sure. Which means if I'm not, somebody else is probably wondering as well. Okay, so we've got APM, American Public Media. We've got Marketplace, and then Marketplace has shows and radio. Can you kind of like set this org chart a little bit for me on sort of how this all relates to each other, what each one is, and sort of what they're all going for?
I wish I could tell you, but I'm as confused as you are. So
I was going to say, I need to learn too. I'm waiting for the Ben explanation.
I mean, so the way that I describe it at cocktail parties, which I'm usually not invited to, but every once in a while someone will invite me to one and I will go. And what I usually say is, okay, so there are all these public radio stations all over the country. You've heard of National Public Radio. That is a company that feeds a lot of content to these stations. These public radio stations carry that content. American Public Media is just like that. It is another company that makes public radio content and feeds it to stations. Obviously, Prairie Home Companion, Dinner Party Download, Splendid Table, et cetera, et cetera. A few years back, Marketplace was subsumed by American Public Radio. American Public Media. American Public Media is headquartered in Minnesota, and Marketplace is headquartered in Los Angeles. And Marketplace was basically a startup and got subsumed by APM. And is still a property of APM effectively. So American Public Media has shows. Marketplace has shows that also technically sort of belong to the larger beast. And those separate shows, there are many radio shows that Marketplace puts out. One is called Marketplace Weekend. There's what we refer to here as the Marketplace PM show with Kai Risdahl. Marketplace Weekend is hosted by Lizzie O'Leary. There's the Marketplace Morning Report, which is a short show that is carried in the last 10 minutes of National Public Radio programming that you might hear on a public radio station in the mornings, sort of every hour in the last 10 minutes or so of the hour. And Marketplace Tech, which is the show I make, is actually one of those Marketplace Morning Report feeds, and then also a more modular, shorter show that is carried at all times of the day by stations all over the country as well. And then, Marketplace slowly but surely, like a lot of radio companies, public radio making companies, has been dipping its toe into the on-demand audio space, and really trying to learn. At least I'll say this about Codebreaker. Codebreaker, I think we really endeavored to learn and learn from a lot of the independent podcast makers that were out there in making our own show, but also learn from some of the sort of the celebrated public radio shows like This American Life and Radiolab, which Claire spent some time at, and some of these other shows to make podcast first. Is that a way too long answer to your question? I can't really tell if that even answered your question.
And the one question I always get with Marketplace is, why are you in New York? Everyone's in LA. because Marketplace PM is in LA, our headquarters is in LA, but we are here in our New York bureau where Ben's out of, David Brancaccio's here, Lizzie O'Leary's here. So we have a growing bureau in New York City.
Yes, we're soon to
Take
over. Yeah, there's a lot more radio talent in New York traditionally than in Los Angeles, or at least so the saying goes. So I think,
and you guys remind them of that regularly.
Oh, that's as often as possible.
Well, it seems if I'm boiling down your explanation, Ben, and oversimplification.
Please do.
It's a network and or collective inside another network and or collective. Yeah, it's
the Russian dolls of
yeah, it's kind of one of those. And that's what I think confused me, right? I think I knew about APM as sort of a simile to NPR. I had that concept. I got that. But Marketplace, at first I thought it was a show. Then I realized it was a suite of shows. And then where Codebreaker kind of almost sits underneath that, which is why I sort of wanted to examine that, because as we go and we jump into Codebreaker here, Codebreaker is part of, if you will, Marketplace, which is under APM. And I'm going to complicate this even more because Codebreaker is sort of a co-production with Tech Insider.
Yeah. We like to keep it simple, you know. That's what we...
Well, we're going to bring that in a second. But what I want to hear about is the idea orientation. Like, what was the original thought here? Besides, as you already touched on, about breaking into on-demand audio.
Sure.
But for the subject matter, sort of the show, and because you guys are doing a number of unique things I want to talk about, but talk about how this kind of started and sort of what the development process was like.
Sure. So, as I said, when I got here to Marketplace, I really wanted to start getting, pushing the company into the on-demand audio space a little bit more than it was at the time. And we actually had a night where we basically got the New York bureau together and a couple of other folks and got some six packs and got together and said, hey, I was basically like, hey, look, we want to make a tech podcast. How do we do that? What's out there? What are you listening to? What do you like? What do you not like? Where's the space for making a tech podcast? And this was actually, I think, slightly before Clare arrived, just slightly. And we actually talked to Brendan Francis Noonan. He was part of that process, and a bunch of the reporters here, a former Marketplace editor named Dave Shaw. And we just kind of sat down and kicked ideas around. I had come with a bunch of branded segment ideas. And one of those branded segments was actually really silly. It was sort of tossed off. It was this idea to have a segment called Is It Evil? And that was essentially just a kind of silly tossed off idea with a lot of other sort of branded segments that would fit in this podcast. And everybody responded really strongly to that. Most of it positive. Most people were amused by it. A few people were like, ugh, I don't like that. But generally, I think the people, it generated a lot of discussion. And then we said, well, wait, why don't we just make that the show somehow? And then we started thinking about, okay, well, maybe we should do this seasonally. And this, by the way, I should say, this was this conversation was pre-Gimlet.
Okay.
I think it might have been just post the first season of Serial.
So you're in the fall of 14.
Yeah, this was a while ago now. And we essentially we had this conversation, or maybe, I guess gosh, Claire, what do you think? Am I getting that wrong?
I'm trying to fact check as the producer right here.
It's all a blur.
I'm I think Gimlet might have launched before Serial, but Startup probably, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure this was, no, that's true. It is true that it was.
But maybe it was when Gimlet was just Startup.
It was,
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was post-Startup, but maybe pre-Gimlet.
Late 2014.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
even though I wasn't there yet.
That's what I was thinking. I know season 1 of Serial was fall of 14. I launched this show September 1st, 2014, and I actually recommended Serial the night before it launched just by reading the description. So
wow.
Those are dates that stick in my head.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was back then, and we just, again, that was just a really early conversation, and we had piloted a couple of things, and that were mostly just discussion of, we had Farhad Manjoo of the New York Times and Stacey Vanek Smith, who's now at this show called Planet Money that NPR produces. And, we just started talking about it and kicking ideas around. And soon after that, we were finally, given some resource in Clare, and Clare came in and proceeded to make it badass from there. But it was really, it started out as a kind of like, hey, let's like get together and talk about the tech news every week. And then we were sort of like, well, that space is like, a lot of people are in that space, Leah Laporte, et cetera. There are a lot of folks doing that. And we should maybe think about something that's a little more, hopefully unique to the tech podcast world. And that sort of got the ball rolling.
So talk about how the decision wasn't clear. Maybe this is when you joined in at this point. You mentioned Is It Evil, which is, I've always looked at sort of this kind of like spin on Google's Don't Be Evil, but that is an underlying theme or what you guys constantly refer to as the one question, if you will, that runs through all of season 1. That is one of several different unique things I want to talk about. So how was that decided that would be sort of season 1's theme, or that even season 1 would have a theme? So a lot of shows have seasons, but not necessarily a season-long theme. What was that process like?
Well, I can let Ben take this because that existed. I came on with the question, and then I had some feedback. I came on and
Claire was like, this show sucks. Don't make it.
No, I came on and there was a set of ideas. There was a Google Doc that was passed on to me that had like Codebreaker and a bunch of zeros and ones, and the name hadn't been finalized at that point. But the name itself, I don't think you just said this, Ben, was a segment that Ben would do with Kai on Marketplace, the PM show, and so we adopted that name. I don't know how that name came about to be for you.
We stole it away.
But anyways, he had the Is It Evil question, the question we're working on for our next season, which is Can It Save Us? And Is It Evil was just the one that we were most excited about and had the most ideas about already. So we decided to make it a theme for the first season. And as far as why we did a theme and a season,
yeah, I think we just started to like nerd out over the idea. I sort of nerd out a little bit on like organizing ideas, even though most people would probably describe me as like totally disorganized. I don't know. I like framing things and thinking about how things can be framed. And I think we just started talking about that.
And we talk a lot about how we can make radio more like TV and fit the TV model, which we can talk about when we talk about how the show is bingeable. But in that way, it made sense for it to be in seasons. So also with tech, where we wanted to look at different stories under one umbrella each episode. So it's hard to narrow it down in tech. So doing a season where we can look at artificial intelligence in one episode and software updates in another helped us narrow down, all right, we're going to do this amount of stories this time and we can look at this again in the future.
Yeah, and I think we I was watching Black Mirror at the time. I don't know if you watched that show, Dan, but I was watching that show and a few other shows that were just, I don't know, making me ask a lot of sort of, not necessarily deep questions, but just thinking a lot about science fiction and the sort of the moral qualities of some science fiction and the kind of allegorical qualities of some science fiction and thinking about that stuff. And I started to, I don't know, it just started to make sense to me. And as we discussed it more and more, Is It Evil seemed like a really good starting point because, the way that we describe it in the show is, we ask these fundamental questions with a sense of humor, a sense of awe, and a sense of dread sometimes. And hey, honestly, a sense of dread. And so I think it just became a really good jumping off point for us, like a conversation starter, if you will, when we were talking about different episodes to make and different topics to tackle. And it just I don't know, at a certain point it felt natural to start there, and we just went on from there. Yeah.
Oh, and I think not only natural, I think it was a perfect fit. And again, though, one of the things I knew that I was really interested in talking to you, Ben, when at that PMX talk, you had gone into detail about a few of these elements that you intertwined into the show's launch and made my ears perk up and say, I'd never heard of anybody doing that before. And that was what made it super interesting. So a theme, of course, has been done before, right? Serial in and of itself has a season-long theme.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
you don't often see that in the tech space, which you talked about sort of what are other tech shows doing or what do you want to see in the tech space, and that's somewhat new. I can think of an example or two, but there are others smaller or definitely not in the same way. But probably the most unique thing relates right back to the show title itself, and I don't want to spoil that one. So either one of you, let's talk about not just the title itself, but the code aspect of all this.
Yeah, so the title is of course inspired by Alan Turing, and he's just such an interesting person. He was such an interesting person, and he's described as sort of one of the first real real people who are thinking deeply about artificial intelligence and computing and things like that, and also of course worked for the British government under somewhat intense circumstances during World War II, the Enigma machine, cracking codes, all this stuff. So that kind of that's where the name came from, and we started. In a way, I think we actually really started with the idea of the bingeability of the show, and just like we were thinking about. I was thinking at the time about how much Netflix was changing television and how we consume television, and that was something I was covering on the Daily Show that I do, and it was something I was talking to a lot of people about, and I was consuming TV myself that way as a user, and so we started to kick around this idea of like, well, what could we make a whole season of a show bingeable? And Claire, I don't know if you want to weigh in here, but I don't know.
When Ben brought up this idea of let's make the whole season and launch it at once, I looked at him and said, you are nuts.
And you thought to yourself, what have I gotten myself in?
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was a great idea in, separating ourselves from other podcasts, and it's something really original. But it's hard, especially when we are a 2-person team and you're making something you don't know if there's an audience for, and you might want to change it as you go. And if you're releasing everything at once, then, you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket and just hoping you don't want to make any changes. And so it was, we talked about it a lot, and it was definitely scary, but yeah, I'm really happy we did it. But yeah,
Claire's first idea was to get a new host, and then when it didn't seem like that was going to be possible.
But you need 51% of the team vote for that to pass,
yeah,
right, Ben?
Exactly.
And she only got 50.
Exactly.
So.
So like in a way, we started with that idea as something that we wanted to try, and that we thought would maybe be kind of innovative and hopefully like catch people's attention and catch their interest, and at the same time, I honestly don't remember where the codes part of it came from. Do you, Claire? I feel like was it Brett? Was it like that thing that I did with Brett, this geocaching? I think it was, but
mixed with me being a nerdy, I used to be into these riddles online. There was a website called WEF Riddles that you start on a page and then you break the code and go to the next one. And just other, like Escape the Rooms being popular, all this reality gaming scene we were interested in. And so we thought, rather than just releasing it all at once, so we could get a momentum going as well. That was my other fear about releasing all at once. It's like, what do we do? Do we throw it all on iTunes and then that's that? We walk away from it, or can we do something else? And that's when we started talking about doing codes. And so to fill everyone in, since I don't know if we've laid this out specifically, there's a code in every episode that's in the audio, and listeners can crack that code, go onto our website, codebreaker.codes, type it in, and get the next episode, and continue on and listen to all of them. And if you don't want to be a code breaker, then you could just wait and it would come out once a week, like a normal podcast.
And that was a way that we kind of figured out how to kind of have our cake and eat it too, Dan. I mean, like we sort of, we like I said, a lot of people internally were really nervous about this idea of binging the whole, making the whole season bingeable and putting it out all at once, and we were nervous about that as well. And I had actually, for another show, I had talked to this guy who's the geocaching king of New York, and I'm forgetting his last name right now, Brett. I'm embarrassed to say I'm forgetting his last name right now, but his name is Brett. He actually is a hedge fund. He helps manage a hedge fund.
Brett Rogers.
He manages a hedge fund here in New York, but he's like super into geocaching, which is of course this thing where you can kind of lay out. I guess you could call them like scavenger hunts. You use your GPS to try and sort of move through the scavenger hunt, and there are clues along the way. And
it was the ancestor to Pokemon Go, basically.
Yeah, in a way, it really was. I mean, it was amazing to see Pokemon Go just blow up and be like, wow, this is like kind of the same thing that we. Obviously with a huge brand attached to it, but in a way it was a lot of kind of what inspired us to try and do what we did with Codebreaker. And I talked to Brett about when I interviewed him for this other show. I talked to him about I don't know, like Susan Cooper books, like fantasy books from when I was growing up, and like Midnight Madness, which is this movie from the 80s that is actually about reality in a way that is an example of reality gaming. And we just started to get excited about it, and also realized that it was a way for us to not only have the show be bingeable, but also have it come out every week in a weird way. And so it just made it more, I don't know, it seemed to make more sense to us putting these in.
So I've speculated on the technical side of this. Let me see if I can get this right. What were you guys doing with episode 2, episode 3 as somebody's on one? Was it not on iTunes and you guys would just send a link to an MP3, or was it on iTunes but hidden? How was that done?
Not on iTunes. You're right. It was we set up a separate website with our digital team that hosted MP3s. That
Gotcha.
You could download them, but then we would upload separately to iTunes afterwards.
Well, that sounds like a risk in and of itself, because should that blow up, that's all hosting, right? Like generating a bill, hypothetically,
yeah.
right?
And
serial level numbers go to download it.
If a problem we would love to have.
That's true.
And we did have people who just figured out that they could, I mean, this is separate, but figured out they could get all the episodes without actually cracking the codes by looking at the source code on our webpage. But we appreciated that. That was another kind of code breaking. And
Yeah.
they could then just obviously share the links around. But we were happy that that's another form of.
Yeah, it was this interesting thing that happened, because a lot of the people that I think really responded to the show were like, puzzlers and coders,
yeah.
and people in the tech industry who are interested in this stuff. And to be honest, it was actually kind of terrifying when we were getting ready to sort of like put it all out there, and we were like, oh my God, some hacker is going to come and just really make us all look really stupid. And so it was scary, but it ended up working out in the end.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Not a Russian hacker. Oh no, we'll leave that.
Oh man. Although we did get people like emailing us. I think one of the people who told us that the file names were easy to figure out on this site was from Eastern Europe. I can't read
It wasn't like Fozzie Bear or Cozy Bear or anything like that.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Thank
Okay,
goodness.
just check. But before all the political activities, they were at first hacking Codebreaker.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how they warmed up.
Training.
That's right.
So season 2 is coming. We've talked about it. There's a lot more I still want to touch on with season 1, but season 2 is coming. The first question I have will codes be making a reappearance? I would assume so. And for season 2, are you going to have them move from episode to episode by finding a custom marketplace Pokemon to get a link to open up the next episode?
That's my dream.
That is Claire's dream. That is Claire's dream.
Can you imagine that the episode has clues where to find the Pokemon, and then after you listen to it, they go find it, which gives them a link to get the next episode.
Yeah, see, you should come help us make these codes. This is a great idea.
Well, I hear they're expanding to, brands and companies, and,
That's right.
maybe somebody needs to look that up and see if you can integrate Codebreaker Season 2 into Pokemon.
If only.
I'd love that.
That'd be wild. Let's talk a little bit more about season 1, because there's a lot to break down inside of these 7 episodes. And folks listening, you mentioned, both of you, the bingeability. Definitely bingeable. I've binged on it just in the last couple of weeks. I think I did it in 2 sittings. I think I went through the first 3 or 4, went to bed, and then finished the rest the next day.
Did you crack the codes then? Or did you just listen the old-fashioned way?
No, I just blew through. I was just blowing through. I don't know that it was funny, because in the codes, a couple of them, which was sort of one of my questions I was going to ask the two of you, was a couple of them were a little like head nod and a wink type thing towards the end.
Yep.
But others seem really like, okay, I just heard that whole thing and I have no idea what it was. So my question is, are you guys going to sort of take the same approach with season 2 with that? Or are you going to kind of make them even harder or easier? Or what have you seen kind of in feedback on that aspect of things that you might integrate next time?
Yeah, so a lot of our feedback has been, these are too easy. And others have said, these are way too hard. So our plan for season 2 is to, with the order of the episodes, to be more deliberate and starting off fairly easy and, cranking it up to hard by the 8th episode.
Claire wants to make them all harder.
Oh yeah, last season they were too easy for me.
I would tend to agree with Claire. I mean, honestly, I would vote on the make them hard, especially now that most people listening who will have been introduced. Right? They don't have an excuse anymore now. They've had their easy times, right? I think you guys are, have full authority to ramp this up as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Yeah, the bulk of my arguments last season, there weren't many arguments in the production process, but they were over how hard the code should be, because I wanted them to just, be a lot harder than some of them ended up being. But I think we ended up with a good mix. And
yeah.
But we'll crank it up next season, but start off a little bit easier and.
Yeah, our hope is to plan it out a little bit more than in season 1 production. It was like a mad dash to releasing it all, and it will be again in season 2. But I think we, our hope is to lean in even more to creating the codes and making them really exciting for people.
Yeah, and the fun thing right now is we still have people cracking the codes from the first season. Obviously, as you did, you can listen to the whole season on iTunes. But we've had people emailing us and asking questions. They're on episode 4 and they're stuck, and they're still trying to do the code method, which we're really happy about.
So we've talked about the hook with the codes. We've talked about the theme with the Is It Evil, but I'm not even paying near enough attention to, and I really want to. The content in these episodes.
Oh yeah, the content
is awesome, right? I mean, there's so much good stuff in here. And the first thing I want to talk about is that you guys ended up with 7 topics, if my numbers are correct,
yep.
Sort of where you ask the question, is it evil? So I guess the first question is sort of what was the process about choosing those? Were there any that you maybe left off the list that you thought could have worked, or were there question marks about including some of these? Sort of what was that whiteboard process about the topics for each episode?
The whiteboard got a lot of use, that's for sure. And you're totally right, by the way. You nailed this. We in the beginning conversations, we both the question was inspired a little bit by Google, and we had there was a point at which we really wanted to do a whole episode about Google, the company and the business. And unfortunately, we just realized at a certain point that was a huge task. And also, we really needed to get like a top, like Sundar Pichai or one of the founders or someone who was going to, who we were going to be able to talk to. And on the production schedule, it looked like it was going to be too hard to do that. So we dipped away from it. But we did kick around a lot of different ideas. Some ideas got cut that I can't even say what they are because they might be in season 2, right?
Yeah, and some of our ideas got focused or renamed. Like we have one episode called Decisive Machines, and that started as artificial intelligence, and I still refer to it as artificial intelligence a bit, but we wanted to narrow it down and maybe call it something a little bit more creative, so it became Decisive Machines.
At one point, I wanted to just make an episode about sex with robots, but that was, I don't know if we ever would have gotten the sign off for that, and also it didn't really fit into the is it evil thing.
And also we already did an episode on internet porn.
No, I mean even before the internet porn. I was like, I was just trying to think of things that public radio would never do and try to do them. So
I don't know, Ben. You guys already shared Can It Save Us for season 2. Sex with robots might be making a comeback.
Oh,
I'm just saying.
It's true.
We wanted it next season.
It's actually a really good idea.
So what's interesting in these topics, guys, is that you guys kind of went, and I love this because you went with stuff that's super familiar with a couple of the episodes, right? Yeah. So most people have heard of things like email and software updates, right?
Yeah.
But then you guys went into stuff that a lot of people may not know much about at all, like the dark web or data tracking. And then you kind of had, sort of the in-between ones, like you said, the Decisive Machine or going viral or internet porn. And you sort of got the whole spectrum of stuff people definitely are familiar with, but stuff that they might not be. And I'm interested on like the dark web, especially. I was thinking when you guys talked to the people that you did there, what is that production process, that research process of finding guests, people to talk to, the gentleman who needed the inhaler for his wife and all that? How do you guys even go about, take me behind the scenes about even putting an episode like that together?
It's a lot of Googling on my end. So some of it is, it's a team process between Ben and I. But I do a lot of just very targeted Google searches and just phone calls to strangers. I'm like looking at Reddit a lot, but Reddit with a keyword search. So I was looking at conversations about the dark web on Reddit and then looking up like evil with it and just finding conversations people are already having and then reaching out to those people. Some of it's just talking to having long background conversations with people in the space and saying, is there something you think people aren't paying enough attention to? I'm trying to think about that episode specifically.
Yeah, we often rely. I see my job to a certain degree as like talking to people who are much smarter than me all the time, trying to talk to people who are much smarter than me all the time. And like, so we did some of that, I think, in the pre-production process of just like basically like calling people up and who were experts in whatever field or who we thought would have interesting ideas and being upfront with them and being like, look, this is a background call. It's not for publication necessarily, but we're working on this topic and we're looking for ideas. And do you have any thoughts? And so I think that was a big, and maybe not a big part of the process, but a part of the process, right? Is
yeah, and other times it would be there's like a New York Times article and there's one line that just really draws us in, and we kind of go on a scavenger hunt for breaking that down, and then. To think of like a specific example, sometimes it's something someone's written about on a blog or something years ago. In our internet porn episode, we talked to a guy named Mike Iamelli, and he talks about how internet porn taught him to have a relationship. He was a straight man and then had feelings for a friend of his who was another man, and he ends up having a relationship with him, and he says he learns to make it work through watching internet porn. And he had written just a personal blog post on the subject, and I had found that in one afternoon of Google searching, and and then we got him on the show, and he was great.
Claire, is your Google search history completely borked after season 1? I mean, I can't imagine what your recommendations look like or your ads in Gmail.
It's nuts. Oh, my spam folder on my mail specifically is like all internet porn related PR emails, which is just
You said you
nuts.
went to Reddit looking at internet porn as a thing with a filter of evil. I'm like, oh, wow, that can't be good. That's...
Yeah, it gets weird.
Very weird.
Yeah.
More to come next season.
Talk to me about some of the feedback that you guys received, because I mean, some of these stories were super eye-opening to me, things I'd not heard of. But let's start there. Let's start with the feedback, because I do have another episode-specific question. But what was the feedback on some or all these episodes that you guys heard from listeners where they kind of like beyond the code? Okay, so just in the content itself.
Yeah, I mean, on the content itself. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think we
People only like the codes.
yeah.
They're just listening for code.
The content is crap. The codes we love. No, it was really wonderful. I mean, we
spent so long making this, just the two of us working. I mean, we had other people come in on the process, but it was really our baby. And working like late nights. And, when you're making something and putting a whole season out at once, you have no idea if anyone's going to like it or listen to it. And then
So
we were
scary.
at the top of the iTunes charts for a couple weeks and had just great feedback. People liked it. People liked the stories. A lot of like, how the hell did you find this? Like, our first episode was Email, Is It Evil? And we have a woman who met her husband by sending an accidental email, and they're
To the
on
wrong address,
to
yeah.
the wrong address, and then they email back and forth and fall in love, and now they're married. And people are like, "How did you find that?" But it's a mix of some newsy elements and some narrative elements, and I think people really responded to getting a range of stories on each topic.
Yeah, and I think our goal generally was to make things. To make sure the show was relatable for people and hopefully, have them respond to that. And also, hopefully have it be a learning experience too. And like help people understand that like email is, it's this protocol. It's kind of like a really old piece of infrastructure of the internet and the World Wide Web or whatever. So it's like, I think hopefully a lot of the feedback that we got was, I mean, I know it was reaction to having stuff in the show that was relatable and that people could say, oh man, this happened to me, or like I knew somebody who this happened to, or whatever. And also just people who are like intrigued by learning things that they hadn't learned before, and the feedback on the content had been, a lot of it actually came through the first code of the show, which I won't say, but there's a way to get in touch with us.
You have to get in touch with us to do the first code. So we got a lot of people, as they were cracking that code, they would say, love the episode, or, give us a little couple sentences about what they thought. Or after they'd realized they were actually in touch with us, they would respond and write a little bit more.
And as Claire said, I definitely had a few moments of like abject terror, just like being like, oh my God, we made this whole thing and like nobody has heard it. Four people total have heard this. And like, we have no idea what the reaction is going to be. And we're releasing it all at once. So if everybody's like, this first episode is terrible, or like, why did you do that, or whatever, then we wouldn't have the power to react to it. So it was really, It was,
Ben
stressful.
and I kept turning to each other and asking every other week, "What are you most scared of this week?"
Yeah,
And that was actually my exact next question. After I get looking at the my Pocket Cast app here, it looks like November 11th of last year, the first one dropped. How long after that did kind of you both exhale at a point where you're like, wait a minute, look at the feedback, here comes these emails, da 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 da. So how long did it take you to kind of breathe again? And then next, what was the feedback from up the chain? Because you guys took a lot of risks, right? Self-hosted MP3s, a full season production, all this stuff. Sort of, when did you exhale, and what did up the chain think?
I still haven't exhaled. Got another season, then I can exhale. No, I think probably like 4 days after when we had some internal issues as well. Like we put the files up and then they were mono and we wanted them to be stereo. Just, some little things that we sorted out, but that all went very smoothly. So I think right away it was such a relief. We saw within the first 24 hours, we saw people solving the first code and contacting us. And that was just it felt like such a success. And we actually did a launch event the week before.
The week before. And had
so
some good feedback.
We did a live event at the New York Tech Meetup here in New York, and then we were there giving out tote bags and had a little booth set up. We did a presentation and then could talk to people one-on-one afterwards, and just all the excitement we got then. At that point, we had finished our episodes. We're just waiting to launch and get everything in order, and people came up to us and were just so excited to hear it, and that was the first little bit of tension release.
Yeah. I mean, I think Claire's younger and stronger and more perfect than I am, but I think for me it was like a week or two before I was like truly like, oh, this is kind of like it's kind of running on its own at this point, and it felt good, and the feedback was really good, and
and within Marketplace too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always it's hard to launch a product, and everybody recognizes that, but it's also like internally, like when you work at a company that's doing a lot of different things, everybody's paying attention to the things that they're doing, and that's totally understandable, and so it can feel like a little bit lonely when you're like getting ready to launch it. And we collaborated with a lot of people across the whole company to put the whole thing together in little bits and pieces, right? The digital team was working on stuff with us, and our underwriting team and all of this stuff. And we got little pieces of their time, but it was, it was great. I mean, people were really nice. People listened to the content, and the higher ups, were pleased with the numbers, and felt like it was a success, and slowly but surely, we were technically a competitor to NPR. So I sent one of the top people of the company a screenshot of when our show was like a couple of slots above the NPR podcasts in the iTunes store. Or on the iTunes charts, and was like, hey, we're doing pretty good, but which I probably shouldn't brag about bragging. But it was.
I didn't know that email was sent.
but we got good response, and we were lucky and glad to have it.
Did they greenlight season 2 right off the bat, or was it not even a question? Like it was always going to be a multi-season venture?
Oh man, there's no booze in here. I think Marketplace is do you want to answer this?
we got a soft green light, but it wasn't. It took a while for us to get the full go ahead.
The fog between us and the green light was thick, but we could see it in the distance.
It's difficult because Ben has a day job. He hosts a daily show, and to do a podcast on top of that takes a lot of work. So, he needs to get some time off to work on this. And
no, not Ben.
Last season he got probably like 4 days total. It was not a lot.
Yeah.
And so it was really all just like overtime work. So, and fitting in 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, and then myself. And I was actually producing a second podcast for Marketplace at the time. So yeah, so it took a little while for the full green light, but we got it, and we're happy to make another season.
Yeah. I think it. Again, like we've been really well supported by the organization, but it is, just like anything, making something new and making something different is hard, and we were trying to do both. And it takes some time for people to be comfortable with that. And
when something takes like this much energy, and it's been almost a year, or it will be. Our new season should come out in November, so that'll be a year since the last season. So, to say we're going to set aside this much time and let you make more episodes, it's a big commitment, but
we're psyched to be supported. So
yeah.
Super glad to hear it. It's become sort of a new line of questioning for me. Earlier episode I released right after I got back from Chicago. I talked to the two ladies who produced Love Me from CBC radio. And at the time I spoke to them, there was no definitive guarantee yet of season 2. And Love Me, sort of like Codebreaker, sort of hit hard right off the bat, got very popular, seems to have a really high level of critical reception. But again, sort of, the higher ups aren't always necessarily automatically jumping to that next season as the fans would obviously love them to do. And it's interesting, that behind the scenes piece where it's not always a foregone conclusion that a listener may think it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's across the board, whether you're I mean, everybody does this out of love still, I think, at this point, right? And like when you're creating content, you're doing so, I think, with a fair amount of blood, sweat, and tears, no matter where you're at. But I think that, I mean, it's always hard to make the decisions around resource allocation, and
especially at a big organization, there are so many hoops you have to jump through. So
and if you're doing it as one person, you're like, am I going to hang out with my kids tonight, or am I going to make this thing, or am I going to spend money on this thing that I need for my home and for my life and my family or whatever, or am I going to spend it on this microphone that helps me,
luckily we didn't have to make those types of decisions, but other people do.
Exactly. I think we're like,
my kids
lucky.
are upstairs, they're fine.
But I think we're lucky in that we do work in an organization where that support is it's not as necessarily as heavy of a decision to make, but it takes longer to make it sometimes.
We're very diplomatic now, but when we were waiting for the green light, we probably would have been more.
A little angsty,
should have interviewed us 5 months ago. We would have been furious.
Well, I think the timing was good then for everybody's own, personal situation. Well, one more question on season 1. You mentioned sort of different bits and pieces sort of helping you guys out throughout the organization, but there were people outside of the organization as well that jumped in, and people I know from other shows and other interests and things like that. The two that are hopping to mind, and I know there's plenty more and I'm missing some, but Molly Wood and of course Anna Sale, Death, Sex, and Money. What was it like kind of getting this sort of all-star crew together that chipped in on different bits of episodes? Yeah,
I mean, I think so Molly was a regular guest of mine on my daily show for a long time, and she works at Marketplace now, and I helped recruit her to Marketplace from the New York Times, and she and I get along great, and she's a total badass, and so it was really fun to get her and I enjoy geeking out over some of these topics just on the day to day. So it was really fun to get her to jump on one of the wrap up conversations with us. And Anna Sale actually helped to basically facilitate my arrival, not my arrival, my the earliest work that I did in radio when I got an internship at WNYC. It must have been 2009. Anna Sale basically made that happen. So Anna Sale and I have been friends for a while, and we basically just reached out and said, "Would you do this?" And she was like, "Great, I'd love to do it." And
did you tell her the topic at the time? Because that one was a little out there.
Yeah.
She was on the internet porn episode.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, her show is death, sex, and money, and sometimes it seems like more death and money than sex, but I think we thought that it was there was brand synergy there, so we in a certain way. So and she was totally game, and she's great, and was really nice about coming and doing it with us. So that was a lot of fun, and having the conversation with Kai was great too. He was. All the folks who joined us from other places or from in the marketplace shop were really generous with their time and their thoughts and lending their personalities and also their just their fun to each episode.
And after all this, you learned how to order stuff on the dark web.
Damn Skippy! Although I think I forgot my
the drug scale never came.
The drug scale never came. That's like one of the big.
What a ripoff.
I know, total ripoff.
It's so funny. You've got all these proven cases of people receiving stuff that's illegal for them to buy, but you intentionally went out to order something legal, and you didn't even get it.
BS, man.
But we found out it was our own fault later somehow, or we hadn't logged back onto the account, and there was a message.
Yeah, so did we incorporate that? We did, right?
I think we wrote a post about it afterwards.
Yeah, you said to go check out a blog post to see if you ever received it.
Yeah. But didn't we put back in the part with Andy and he was like, we called him up.
Oh, we did call him up. Yeah, I don't even remember what's in here anymore. It's been too long.
Where he had logged in and said there was 2 messages.
We did put it in.
Yep.
And we were also moving offices at the time, so there were some extenuating circumstances.
Here I thought I was sharing some nice behind the scenes, but it's in the episode.
Actually in the episode.
It was in the episode.
Yeah.
Well, it never came, so that's somewhat behind the scenes. So were there any other, let's go behind the scenes. When you were going through there, was there anything else you'd considered ordering?
Yeah, sure. For sure.
Legal?
Why not? None of it legal. But yeah.
But to make it in the show, you.
I mean, like, what? Like,
well, I think what's great in that add-in. I think in the add-in you said you're shipping it to the studio. If I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember beeping out I don't know if I beeped it or cut it, but I had to remove our address.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh, I think you cut it because he just said like 8 p.m. New York.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, if you've got, I think it's fascinating to look at a black market anywhere, right, and see what's for sale, and window shop at the very least and see what's for sale. I think that's fascinating.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think the whole first season is fascinating. Each and every episode, there's so much entertainment stuff, and to kind of relate you guys to another APM show we mentioned briefly already, Dinner Party Download. Both shows are very loaded with content. Brief segments packed to the gills with guests and topic and information, and I think you guys did a phenomenal job with season 1. I'm standing by at season 2. Is it okay to say a date? Is there a date yet or a window of time?
There's a window of time.
November.
You
mentioned that.
We think it's November. Yeah.
We're not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But strongly
targeting November.
Targeting November.
We got to figure out an event, and we have some other things we need to sort out. But
we were actually joking the other day that one of the codes before the season even starts should just be like trying to figure out when the actual launch date is.
Yeah, we'll put out a code and we'll say, solve this, and it'll give you the launch date. But we actually will not. There won't be a real breakable code, and so our listeners will have to make up the launch date and tell us.
So we can expect a lot of the same things. We're going to have codes again. We're going to have the whole season drop at once.
Yep.
That whole format is being resurrected again.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And eight episodes this time around.
Yep.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
So please, anyone who's heard us talk about this who hasn't gone and checked all this out, give them all the details, websites, links, social stuff. Where can they find this?
Yeah, so our social accounts, we actually basically took over The Daily Show. I host those social accounts in order to promote the show during the season. So the Twitter handle is at Marketplace Tech. That's how you get to the Daily Show. And also, again, the Daily Show's Twitter handle will go dark and be taken over by Codebreaker when the season launches. Facebook.com/Marketplace Tech. There's information there as well. But really, the probably the most important is Codebreaker.codes. That's the custom website that we built for the show. You can find a lot of stuff on there, a lot of information about the show. It'll connect you to iTunes, et cetera, et cetera.
And yeah, Codebreaker, one word. You can search it on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. I have so many people who think it's code space breakers.
Yeah.
And I usually don't have the heart to tell friends of mine, family that are like, oh, I listen to Codebreakers and I love it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's technically Codebreaker, one word, no S. But
yeah. But a lot of we're all in it together. So it's Codebreakers and
we are Codebreakers and we call our fans Codebreakers, but the show itself, Codebreaker, one word.
Yeah.
And both of you are on Twitter?
Yes, I'm at the Brock Johnson.
I'm at Clare Toenis with my silent O's, and my name has
you should spell
no
it out.
I.
You should spell it out.
All the links will be in the show notes. I'll have all of these linked up as well. So
cool.
All of them will be there. And folks, I cannot put my strongest recommendation possible behind the work that Ben and Claire have done with Codebreaker. It's an awesome show, totally bingeable, and I promise you will enjoy it if you try to solve the codes or not. So, Ben and Claire, thank you guys very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
This was great.
Yeah, this was awesome.
You have us excited to keep working on this new season.
Yeah, you better solve some codes next season, Dan.
Yeah.
Well, next time I will go in line, I promise, and I will do my best.
Cool.
Folks, that will do it for episode 102 of the Podcast Digest. Hope you guys enjoyed. Check out Codebreaker. Until next week, my name's Dan Lefebvre.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.